welcome to episode number one of Unravelled, our
Hello, hello,
very
hello.
wordy podcast. Good morning, Shan. How are you?
I'm okay. Feeling really nervous, and but I'm happy to be here. I'm really glad that I'm doing this with you.
Yes, man. Same
How are
here.
you?
I'm okay. I think I'm nervous as well because yeah, you got this pressure, right? Because although it seems like we're just talking to each other, like you also know that in the back of your mind you're recording a podcast and you don't want to make a fool out of yourself.
Yeah,
But that's part of why we're doing this, I think, right?
yeah, yeah, definitely. Like I think it's yeah. I mean, there's a multitude of reasons of why I think this is good, not just for me, but for both of us and
Yeah.
in our relationship. But also, I think a lot of people would potentially benefit from listening to us spill our beans, so to speak.
Yeah, you mentioned relationship. We should probably start by talking about our relationship because that could mean a lot of things today. So, so what do we mean? Who are we? Who are you, Sean? Let's start with you. Tell me about yourself.
Me. Okay. So me specifically, um, my name is Shan. Um, I was born and raised in Hong Kong. I am half Filipino, half Singaporean Indian. Raised in Hong Kong
Did you just say
through a
Singaporean
Canadian
Indian, dude?
education system.
Did you just say
Yeah.
Singaporean Indian?
Wait, is it, see, this is the thing, right? Like, I'm never sure whether this is like the French way of doing things, where they're just like, you're French, right? Like just French. Um,
But is there
have
like a
I have I
Indian French? I
have I
mean, like,
offended the Singaporean in this in this conversation?
so if you're Singaporean, that's your nationality, right? If you're
Okay.
Indian, well, again, like what do you mean by Indian, right? So if you're Indian, that means are you saying your nationality is Indian or your race? So race-wise, you're Punjabi, half Punjabi, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So you're
I
actually
suppose.
half Filipino and half Punjabi.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just hijacked your introduction. Carry on,
No,
go
no,
ahead.
not at all. No, no, no. I think that's fair. Like, because and I'd love to talk about that, like just culturally what that kind of means to us. And we don't necessarily need to talk about that now, but yeah. So I am half Filipino, half Punjabi,
And there you go.
um, and I'd love to get your sense of what that means to you, because again, like I think in terms of my upbringing, I sort of feel like I gravitated more towards my Filipino side,
Hmm.
for one reason or another. But in terms of culinary tastes, I I mean the debate still goes on, between Filipino food and Indian food and just food in general.
Yeah.
Um, Anytime anyone tries to pinpoint what my favorites are, I can never answer that question as straightforward as anyone wants to. But anyway, so yeah, that's another thing about me. I love food. And I've been in the recruitment industry for about 14 years now.
Nice.
How we know each other is
How do we know
from my
each other, Sean?
Punjabi side. Did you want to sort of go into a bit about yourself first, or shall I go straight into how we know each other? I
Yeah,
feel like
just
you
go.
should introduce yourself first.
Sure, I'll do a very quick intro. So my name is Hardesh. I'm all Punjabi. Born and raised in Singapore. Well, studied in Australia for a bit. What I do for a living, I've done many things, fortunately or unfortunately. So trained as a lawyer, um, got into compliance for a good number of years, ran my own startup for a bit, had my own consultancy for a bit, and then now I build ventures for corporates, and it's really really interesting as a profession because essentially you get to be creative for a living. You get to solve problems, and you get to work on different types of projects for different corporates. So as you're building something, you're learning, right? Um, so yeah, that's what I do. And what is our relationship, Shan?
Our relationship, um, I would say we are related by blood,
Yeah, there was too much. There was too
right?
much. too much of a pause.
I know, right? I was
You're
just
like,
trying to like think about
well,
like
well,
how do I go about this? Because like on one hand, I like I always love to cut tension, or not that there's any tension here, but I love jumping in with a joke. And frankly, it probably would have been an inappropriate one, so I had to stop myself, and that was the pause.
yeah, I think I know where you're
But
going with
anyway,
that.
yeah. So we are related by blood.
Yeah.
Um, your father and my father are brothers,
Mm-hmm.
and so that naturally makes us first cousins. And through a series of trips around the world together, we've reconnected through very deep, heartfelt conversations that we then felt like it would be ideal
Hmm.
to do something like this, i.e., a podcast
Yeah.
where we'd record our conversations, and hopefully through our conversations learn a bit more about each other, and sort of see where see if it helps benefit anybody else that's listening.
So now let's get into it. We're talking about perspectives, we're talking about conversations we've had. What are we talking about? So I think let me set some context, right? I think we've made people wait
Yeah.
long enough. So the podcast is called Unraveled. And really, I think I'll just share my perspective, right? Like why I
Mm,
think it's important to talk about this and what it is that we're talking about. So when we say unravel, I think what I think I would like to get at is unraveling the self, right? It's really about, you know, deciphering this mystery that we are as human beings, as people, right? Um, Growing up, I think, like most people, I really dove into this, the self-help arena, and I was really a big fan of all these books that, sort of laid out different strategies in terms of how you could have a better life, right? Always a big fan of these books, always, really into understanding how I can improve myself, how I can be a better version of myself. And along the way, I think, you sort of, as you grow older, as you go through life, and as you encounter many, many different episodes, right? You start realizing that, hey, maybe it's not so simple. Maybe it's not so cut and dry as just learning this strategy on paper and then just creating a plan for yourself and then just implementing it. There's something more to this, right? And
mm,
and throughout this journey, I kind of arrived at this point, not on my own, obviously, just by, consuming other material and thinking and listening to other people who are far more educated and enlightened than me. Um, and I just got to this point where I realized, like, look, maybe it's time to start introspecting, not really introspecting, but really sort of examining myself. Like when I say self-help, who am I helping, right?
mm,
When we talk about self-love, like what is it that I'm loving? Is it my body, my mind, my emotions? And then as you get into it, you come up with a lot more questions, and then you realize you don't really know a lot about yourself, that, and you take it for granted, right? So in a very convoluted way, what I'm trying to say is, I think from my perspective, I think this podcast is about unraveling the self and really not trying to get to a point where we're telling people how we think people should live, but really sort of going on this journey together where we sort of examine, what it means to be a person, what it means to be a man, you know,
mm,
um, and talk through this process, right? Sort of unraveling the self, almost taking apart what we assume to be a self and sort of see like, okay, what's there? What am I actually really made up of? You know what I'm saying?
mhm.
Does that make sense? Yeah. So I think
Yeah.
that's what I think the podcast is about. Granted that we're still trying to figure this out a little bit as we go along, but generally that's a theme. How's that sound?
Yeah. I love that. Like
Did it
I
make
don't
sense?
mind feeling, yeah, 100%. Like
Yeah.
it's and it's really interesting because that thing that you started off with um actually triggered a memory of mine that I didn't really quite remember until now.
Mm,
But you talk about self-help books when you were growing up, and it's interesting because when I think back of myself growing up, I think of like this funny, bubbly kid that was just trying to make himself and those around him happy all the time.
Yeah.
But the thing that I seem to gravitate towards was these self-help books, but specifically Chicken Soup for the Soul.
Hmm.
I don't know if you ever read those.
I have, but such a long time
Honestly,
ago though.
yeah, that's the thing. I'm not even sure if they still continue that series, but and I remember actually getting teased a few times reading that book um by my classmates, but I don't know, like it was just one of those things where for all the 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 way that I was brought up and the difficulties that I faced those self-help books actually was uh was a bit of a haven, a safe haven for me.
Hmm.
um and I think more immediately what unraveled means to me is actually something that parallels the a journey that I've been going through for the past 8 months or so, where I've
Hmm.
kind of been doing that on my own. And interestingly, I thought I knew myself. Um, but through these past 8 months and some of the work that I've been doing, I've actually realized that there's just so much more to me um, that I didn't really even question. Um, and by that I mean, I think we as human beings, like we like to think of ourselves as constantly evolving, improving oneself on a day-to-day basis. But I started even looking at the traits that people around me thought were positive about me and asking myself why. Like, why am
Hmm.
I the way that I am? Why specifically that, you know?
Hmm.
Um, and I think it fits within the theme of what you've described. You call it unraveling. To me, I call it surrendering. And
Hmm.
the two words are synonymous in this context, but I think also it also has its negative connotations, right? Unraveled to
Hmm.
me, when I first heard the word, sounds almost like unhinged,
Yeah.
and surrender is sort of like giving up, but but to elaborate a little bit further on unraveled, um, it's like it's like you look at ourselves and we're picking out every single piece of who we are, and we're just looking at it and examining it and thinking, huh, why is this piece the way that it is,
Yeah.
right? um, and just being observers of ourselves, um, and hopefully by offering that kind of perspective, it allows us to kind of learn a bit more about each other, stay connected, which I feel like in this social media prone world we're doing way too less of. Weirdly,
Hmm.
even though we are digitally connected, we're not actually connecting with one another because we're posing this superficial version of ourselves. But yeah, I hope that it connects us more
Yeah.
by doing this, and also learning from each other. Because I know from the conversation that we've had so far, I've learned from your perspective, and I know that I'll continue to learn. Um, and it's not just because you're a little bit older than me.
Hey, hey, hey. Let's not go down that road. But hey, man, there's so much that you said in there that's super interesting. Particularly the fact that we make assumptions about who we are, right?
Yeah.
That all of us actually continue and, we operate on this assumption that we know who we are, right? And that I'm just the kind of person who likes this. I'm just the person who does this. This is how I navigate my relationship. This is the kind of person that I date. All of those are assumptions, right? And then I realized that we never actually spend time to sort of examine, like you said, why. Why do I have those assumptions about myself, right? So,
Yeah.
and I take note of what you said, like what unravel can mean, from a positive and negative perspective. I prefer to simplify it like as if it's a mystery, right? You try and unravel this mystery, right? It's as if it's a
Yeah.
detective novel, right? And you're reading this book and you're trying to uncover this mystery that is yourself, right? Which in itself, it's fun because it's about being curious. It's about being, funnily enough, it requires you to be really truly self-centered. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but to really sort of examine yourself, to be really, really curious and interested in yourself, And
Yeah.
the second word that you said that was super super important is this idea of being an observer, right? Because
Yeah.
we're always reacting. Like a thought comes up, we
100%.
assume it's ours. An emotion comes up, we react, So we're always reacting. And
Hmm.
so this idea of being an observer is it allows you to sort of detach or gives you the basis upon which you can sort of detach yourself from your emotions, from your thoughts, and just start
Hmm.
observing yourself, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I have a
Yeah. And
question.
to be clear,
Go ahead, go
it's
ahead.
it's sort of like the observation isn't meant to resist that feeling or reaction that you have in that moment. It's to allow yourself the room to just think for a second and think, is this the appropriate response? Because
Hmm.
I think, and we'll go into this a bit more later, but there are certain aspects of myself that I think were useful once upon a time,
Yeah.
but I think they're aspects of myself that I think are outdated now,
Mm,
especially for the circumstances in which I live in now. They're outdated, and we keep kind of reacting towards certain things, especially when we're a little bit tired or underfed or overworked or stressed. And sometimes I think observing oneself, not all the time, but at
yeah.
least some of the time during the day is a useful exercise for anyone.
Yeah. Dude, I think
Sorry.
that's so important because this idea of, not realizing when you're underfed, or you're just tired, right? Um, that requires you to at least be aware of yourself. I dated this person
Mm.
once who, amongst many things, mentioned this phrase where she said she had been doing a lot of work on herself. I never knew what that
Okay.
meant. As a guy,
Yeah.
like that's the first time I heard anyone say like I've been doing a lot of work on myself. So the minute she said that, I felt like, firstly, I felt completely inadequate and deficient in some way. Like, okay, why am I not working on myself? Next question is, how do I work on myself, right? Um, and there's a good thing and there's a bad thing to that whole idea of working on yourself because it implies that there's something to fix, right? Whereas I
Mm.
think where I'm sort of trying to approach this is trying to just notice, like if I'm hungry, if I'm hungry at least, right? Why,
Hmm.
and then it forces you to consider that maybe you're just a process. Your state of being in any moment is a process, is an outcome, right? So there's certain inputs that are creating this situation or this feeling that you're
Hmm.
having, right? So it allows you to examine that and notice that, and then hopefully tweak it, do some things to tweak it, right? But first,
Yeah.
before you can help yourself, you first need to notice your bullshit. You first need to pay attention. You need to be curious, right?
Hmm.
And then there's this other thing that you mentioned about having different aspects of ourselves that, we may have moved past, right? Like we used to be one way and now we're some other way, right? We've changed, we've evolved.
Hmm.
Sometimes that's hard because the people that you hang out with are still clinging to the old aspect, the old version of you, right? They still expect you to be that person. They still engage with you, with that person.
Yeah.
And then you show up and you're like, shit, I'm this other person now, right? I want to go
Hmm.
down this other route, right? And then
Yeah.
you almost put in this place where you're like, you have to choose. Do you
Mm.
continue hanging out with those people? Can they embrace the new you? So that's interesting as well. And I don't want to hijack this in a different tangent, but that's
Yeah.
what struck me when you mentioned this idea of different aspects of ourselves, right?
Yeah. Actually, it's funny. Like, the two things that I that stood out from what you said. Firstly, this person that you used to see,
Mm.
um, you know, it's funny because the the women in my life, that are closest to me, I feel, are very much like that. They're very in tune with themselves, and
Yeah.
so now that I've been going through this uh I don't know, I don't want to call it a journey of self-discovery because it sounds so lame, but to a certain degree it is very much that.
Yeah.
Um they've sort of, I've been telling them things that I've realized, these profound realizations, and they just have this deadpan look at me and they're just like, "Are you serious? That's what we've been telling you all along." And it's just funny, like I think it's just at least, certainly at least the women in my life, they're and potentially, I think, the like just women in general, and I don't want to do this whole like male versus female thing, but I
Yeah.
do feel like, to a certain degree, women are, a lot more in tune with themselves
Mm.
naturally, um and us men have to sort of play catch up, and actually some don't ever go down this path of being in tune with oneself. So yeah, but secondly, this whole aspect of evolving to a point where you then start questioning your social circle and the friends around you. I actually got to that point about
Yeah.
7 months ago, and it was during the first month of the start of this, journey of introspection, if you will. And yeah, I went into a social event thinking, wow, like this could potentially be the end of many of these close friendships that I'd made for years and years. And it was really interesting. Before that happened, my gut was telling me I should probably tell everybody what I've been going through,
Yeah.
just so there's a little bit of context, because, yeah, I went into it a little bit nervous. There were certain aspects of what I used to do that I didn't, that I stopped doing, and I thought, I might not be able to hang out with these people because they sort of still continue, doing, some of these things that I personally don't enjoy anymore.
Yeah.
And you know what? It was amazing. Like, they're and it's, I think, proof of the friendships, that I hold near and dear to me. But also, I think it was a great example of just communicating, and
Mm.
talking to people around you. And when you open up, it's fascinating what how that ripple effect, um, carries on to those around you.
Yeah.
I had this initial conversation with my friends on a WhatsApp group, and a lot of them were very supportive. And I thought that was going to be the surface. Sorry, I thought that was going to be the end of that. But I had quite a few people message me on the side saying, "Hey, I've actually been kind of going through a bit of that myself, and like, can I talk to you a bit about it?"
Mm.
And it's just interesting. I think that sort of led me to opening up more. And I think we'll both realize, and hopefully we'll both realize, that as we continue this, we'll start to realize that there's a lot of people that either need to hear this or are already starting to think about it.
Yeah.
And hopefully when they listen to this, it does create the same kind of ripple effect, to just open up, you know, like,
Yeah.
talk to the people around you, really open up. Even if it just also makes you look like a bit of an idiot sometimes, like
Mm.
that's not a bad thing. That's what friends and close relationships and family are for, right?
Yeah.
Um, for both the good and the bad. Um, but but yeah,
That's-
I love this because, like, I kind of feel like this has kind of gone into, how did we come to this and why it's
Yeah.
important. We've just sort of naturally spilled into that
Yeah.
third topic.
it has. And I mean, like, just to close up that point you were sharing about your friends, I think sometimes we just have to have a little bit more faith in people, right? Um,
Yeah,
and
100%.
not just not assume so much. Sometimes you just have to trust that, look, we can share and people may just be supportive of our journey, of our change, of our evolution, right? Um, and when it comes to men needing like to talk about these things or to hear more of these things, I think that's a really interesting
Hmm.
point. I have a question for you, right? I've always said this
Go
to
for it.
myself. I always said this to myself. And I think the reason I think I'm much more in tune with my inner workings, if you like, why I'm much more intuitive is because I was raised by a woman, right? I learned how to
Mm,
be a man through a woman, right? By
mm,
my mother, right? And my dad was never really present in my life. And
hmm.
I think that's a huge factor, like in me being the way that I am. And so the question I have for you is, do you think that in any way is relevant for you as well, in terms of you being the way you are, you being open or interested in these kind of conversations, this topic of self-discovery and just being much more in tune with your emotions and your thoughts, right?
Um, yeah, look, I think the general in the general sense, yeah, like we are definitely who we are by the people that raised us.
Mm,
And for some people, they take lessons, direct lessons from what their parents or the people that brought them up did for them.
mm,
Other people learn lessons from looking at what those same people do and learn not to do them.
yeah, yeah,
um, and but in terms of how I've kind of led myself into this, I think the best way to summarize that up is that there was one particular way that I thought would lead me to my penultimate goal, right? That was the thing, right? That was again the start of the descent where I was just like, oh crap, I've achieved the things that I wanted to achieve. What now? Right?
mm,
And that was the theme of what was going on in my head, like what's next, what now, right? And I just thought that thought would eventually go away. And I
mm,
realized that that was naive. That was actually like everything that I look at now in life, every aspect of life. It's a learning lesson,
yeah,
and life can't always be on the up. It can't always be happy. It can't always be succeeding,
yeah,
because how do you appreciate the light without the darkness? And
mm-hmm,
again, like that that metaphor is it I can appreciate that it probably could make some people cringe, just like, ooh, light and dark or black and white, but
yeah,
it is that is what it is, like I've been reading this book about how happiness works in our brain, and the reality that happiness and sadness are actually sitting on opposite ends of a seesaw in your brain.
yeah,
And every time you're happy, the brain tries to achieve this thing called homeostasis, where the moment you're happy, there's chemicals in your brain that kind of lean things towards the side of sadness so that it
mm,
balances out. And that is life.
mm,
Um, but those are one of many other books that I've read that have kind of helped me get to this point. And when I say this point, I don't say this as some sort of like enlightened person that like knows all the answers to everything. No, if anything, like I'm actually left with even more questions.
yeah,
And I understand now that perfection is something that I will never ever achieve. I can achieve progress, right, or my version of progress,
yeah,
um, but I can but that is the pursuit in life. It's not perfection, it's progress.
yeah,
And I'm learning more and more about myself, and And I love that because I'm embracing both the good and the bad, and things actually to me don't fall into those categories. Bad is also actually just as good because I can learn from the bad, you know.
Mm,
And that's sort of something that we'll probably go into at some point later.
yeah,
The things that make me feel uncomfortable now, I've been leaning more and more into that because I've realized that a lot of the things that make us feel uncomfortable actually um, are where we could learn and
yeah,
grow the most.
yeah.
But anyway, I've kind of started rambling and taking over this
No, it's all right,
conversation.
man.
This is
It's
meant to be a dialogue.
That's okay. That's a lot. That's a lot in there. That's really, really interesting. I think this bit about leaning in, I was just thinking about this last night, right? Where I think we talked about this a while ago about leaning into difficult challenges, right? Um,
Mm,
and I know I've had a few conversations with a few people recently about dealing with stuff that you don't like to do, whether it's profession,
mhm.
whether it's situations in your personal life where you'd rather just avoid it or avoid those people or turn away and run or just put your hand up and say, no, I'm not comfortable doing this kind of work, right? But then you never grow,
Yeah,
right? Because you never
yeah,
sort of expose yourself to a difficult situation that will test
mhm.
you, that will challenge you and force you to sort of confront the areas of or aspects of yourself that need development. But this idea of leaning in, I think the way I was thinking about this is not so much just about diving in head first and just saying, "Come what may, let's just do this shit." But I think
Yeah,
it's you know what I mean? Like it's a bit of a gung ho thing, right?
yeah,
But
yeah. It's
I
kind of
think
like
it's
jumping out of a plane without a parachute.
yeah,
Like,
but
you
you
know,
can't
you do
always
need
do
to put
that.
in some precautions. Yeah,
Exactly, you can't always do that because you might just die.
yeah,
But it's I think that an aspect to this is to just observe it, right? Observe what the hell it is that's terrifying you, right? And understanding that, this thing terrifies me. Why does it terrify me, right? And ease yourself
Mm,
into it. Leaning in doesn't always have to mean diving into the situation head first. You could just inch your way in, right? And before you
yeah.
know it, like you said earlier, right? Doing really hard things then no longer become hard because you've been progressively doing them, right?
To your point, actually, like I do feel, and like I think this completely makes sense the older that you get, the
Mm,
more risk averse you become. And that's completely
yeah.
understandable. I think like it's just human nature to want to gravitate away from the things that make you feel anxious, nervous. Um, the thing that kind of gets your blood going because that triggers the survival impulses that quite frankly leaves you feeling rather
Yeah.
exhausted, right?
Yeah.
And the older you get, obviously the less prone you're going to want to be to exposing yourself to that. But just
Mm,
like anything else, a healthy dose of it actually is helpful to one's growth. And also just not being complacent in life, you
yeah.
know.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. But I'd like to get back to why this topic matters to us. I think you touched
Yeah.
on a few reasons earlier. Um,
Hmm.
about, hitting your goals and then realizing now what, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's interesting because for me as well, there's a lot of the way I've lived my life has been about asserting control, right? This sort of having a
Yep.
plan, finding the right plan, putting that plan into place diligently with discipline, with motivation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then realizing, shit, the results don't always come, the way you expect them to. Sometimes they don't even show up at all,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
And and then in addition to that, you throw in, all of the curveballs that life throws at you, right? That you
Hmm.
can't plan for, and I'm talking about the deep and heavy stuff that happens in life. And then you realize, like, shit, I don't have a plan to deal with these things. And then you also realize that, shit, I'm actually human. These things do impact me. They do throw me off course. And I do take time to think and process these things. As much as I like to say, dude, I'm fine, no problem, and I'm not really affected by this, but actually you are. You just don't even realize it.
Yeah.
Um, So those things happened to me, and for a while it seemed like it was just one thing after the other for like a good 10 years. Right? Like it's just
Mm,
one big major thing after another, from my relationships to my work to my family and losing people that I love. And just
mm,
at the end of it, you just sit there and you go like, fuck, like this is heavy, and you feel like you've just been constantly getting beaten up and you don't even have
yeah.
time to just sit back and reflect because you're in the survival mode, right?
Hmm.
And then I think COVID happened, and that happened right after my startup crashed after
Hmm.
3 years of working my ass off. Um, and that, I guess, was the climax for me, where I just had to sit down and sort of really look at myself, not because I wanted to, but because I realized, like, shit, man, I'm empty. My tank's empty. There's nothing left
Mm,
in there. It's not that I don't want to hang out with people or do things. It's just there's just nothing left, right? And
hmm.
because COVID sort of forced all of us indoors and kept us there for a good number of months, um, yeah. So I think just the idea that you have all this time by yourself and you're forced to just then realize, shit, man, there's a lot of stuff that I just need to deal with because I can't run away from it. There's only so much you can watch on Netflix and so much time you can spend scrolling, mindlessly on social media, right?
Hmm.
And by the way, I think social media has turned most of us into warriors, where we spend more time observing other people than
Warriors.
ourselves, right? As in warriors, right? Like not warriors, but
Yeah.
warriors, where we spend so
Oh,
much
right.
time
Okay.
observing other people and what they're doing, and we never take the time to sort of, hey, maybe be a bit more interested in yourself. And I think
Mm,
that
that's
time
so
sort of
true.
really forced me, and I think a lot of other people as well, to just look at the state of myself, right? And that's
Yeah.
where I started, like you, I came across a lot of very, very interesting material that just sort of set me down this path, right? To stop trying to find solutions to problems that you haven't even learned how to articulate well, you know like
Mm,
I feel like, I can't say we because I'm just talking about myself. Like I'm always so reactive in terms of finding a quick fix, to a problem that
hmm.
I'm facing. Whether if I need more money, it's okay, what can I do? What kind of hustle can I do? What kind of business can I start? If
Hmm.
it's relationships, it's the same thing, right? Like finding someone, anyone, that is convenient, right? And that's
Mm,
just a quick fix. um and it doesn't work out. It doesn't work out, because then it's just a mask. You're just looking for a solve. You're not actually addressing the cause of the problem, right? um,
yeah.
and as you go down that road and you realize that you know I have to work on myself, as that chick that I was dating said, I have to do some work on
Hmm.
myself.
Yeah.
And I think what I'm trying to say is there's too much emphasis, I feel, on finding solutions and not enough on uncovering the problems and learning how to articulate those problems for yourself. Like, what are you going through, right? Why are you going
Yeah.
through this, right? And if you really want to solve that situation, you need to basically look at it. You need to observe, and that takes time and
Mm,
it's highly, highly unpleasant, right? Um, but yeah, I think
yeah.
that's kind of one of the biggest motivations for me wanting to do this together with you. Is to start
Hmm.
having these conversations, because at the end of this, right, it's our lives that we're talking about, you know,
Yeah.
and it ends. Life ends, and I know we touched on this a
Hmm.
few days ago when we were just talking, but having to confront the prospect of death, as much as we want to avoid it, and it's so easy to avoid it, with all the distractions we have today, but we are slowly marching towards that end, you know. So I want to be able to give myself a gift. The biggest gift of all is, you know, the last few moments that I have before I pass, right?
Hmm.
I don't want to tell myself, yeah, I made all this money, I married the, one of my dreams, etc., etc. I want something more. And I don't even know what that is, but I think what it is basically to know that I made the best use of my life. And I'm coming to realize that that doesn't necessarily mean material gains, you know?
Hmm.
doesn't necessarily mean being successful materially, but it has to mean something more. And I don't have the answers, but I think I'm getting an inkling of what it could be, um,
Mhm.
which starts with sort of really discovering what I am. And in the process of doing that, I think I have a better idea of what life is about, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I love that.
Did it just get too
Um,
heavy?
no, it's really interesting because from from the point of where you are right now, I sort of feel like we are we've kind of reached a similar like sorry, we're going down a very similar path. It's
Mm,
just how we got there is actually very different
yeah,
to to um to where we are now. Just in the sense that, it sounds like a lot of the things that brought you to where you are now um actually came from, again, like, just to summarize, like a lot of things that weren't necessarily going in the direction that you wanted it
yeah,
to put it lightly. Um, and it's interesting because when I look back at how my descent started, and I keep calling it a descent because that is sort of how I saw it. Like I'd done the things that I set out to do, but then still ended up not being happy because of it, you know?
mm,
And there's um and that's the thing. I think the best way to describe it is I'm recalibrating.
yeah,
So there are certain things that are still um important, but they're not the end all and be all,
yeah,
right? Like finances and a means to an end, to put a roof over my head, clothes on my back, food on my plate. Those are the bare necessities. But then also, I want to be able to carry on doing what I was doing before, where I was helping um, those around me, and actually being able to help beyond people that are personally connected to me.
yeah,
Um, but um, but yeah, I think what what I think that the problem that I'd been having was my expectations versus reality.
mm,
And that's such a overworked topic on social media, right?
yeah,
But that is essentially what happened to me. There was a certain expectation that I had once I reached a certain level of success, and that success came. But then the reality was there were certain expectations that I had that didn't meet the reality.
yeah,
Um, and that caused tremendous friction within myself, and that rippled out to those around me. Um, and then it all kind of came to a head um, for me, and you know what? I'm glad that it did, um, because it wouldn't have forced me to really look at at um, at everything, and revisit uh, how I respond to things, the way that I perceive things, um, and what I value as success and failure. And I'm still working on that. There
yeah,
are days where I still have that little voice in my head that's saying whatever it is that I've been doing today has amounted to nothing,
mm,
right? You have wasted your time. What are you doing? Um, but again, like, when I look at what I've been doing on a day to day now by comparison to a few years ago, or even like 8 months ago, it's a tremendous amount of progress and growth. It's just the things that I put value on are not just financial gains anymore,
yeah,
and that is okay. um, I'm connecting more with people. That's the thing. It's really interesting by naturally doing this process of self-inquiry and unraveling, I've actually become more of the parts of me that I do like
Hmm.
and appreciate, and I've naturally just gravitated away from the things that I don't really appreciate about
Yeah.
myself, you know. Um, but I also feel like this mind of ours, it has a way of adapting to the way that we're trying to be, or this version of ourselves, and so it it sometimes uses this process of self-inquiry to then pick like the smallest thing and tell myself you're not good enough, you know.
Hmm.
And that's brutal because
Yeah.
on one hand, like, it's helpful because it does help me to continually try to look at what needs improving, and that skill is helpful, right? But sometimes when I just kind of want to like kick my feet up and just take a moment, that same um part of me that's saying, hey, what else is there that we can improve, is also nitpicking at like the smallest little things and saying, why did you do that, or why did you do that, but couldn't you have done that faster,
Hmm.
right? You know.
It's almost as if you're being a
um
perfectionist, right? Yeah,
exactly.
there you go.
Yeah, no, that's
That's the
that's
critic
exactly
in
it.
you. It's a critic in you that's
Yeah,
telling you, is always shitting on you and telling you, like, look, you're not doing enough. But like you said earlier, if
yeah.
you step back and if you just do an assessment over a longer
Hmm.
period of time, you realize that shit, actually, I have made some progress, and it is something, that's worth celebrating, right?
Yeah, 100%. And that's the thing, this whole process of self-inquiry, it's really, I think there was a certain misconception that I made going into this, and it was the idea that I could potentially distance myself away from these traits and attributes that I deemed as negative, right?
Yeah.
But actually, the process of self-inquiry is looking at quite literally everything, the good and the
Hmm.
bad, the things that you appreciate and the things that you don't really appreciate about yourself,
Yeah.
um, and actually finding that you'll potentially learn more from the things that you don't appreciate from yourself, because you look at it and you just kind of ask yourself, like, why is this the way that it is?
Yeah.
And when you peel back the layers, you realize that it all comes down um to fundamental aspects of how each of us was brought up.
Yeah. And I think it's so important that if you are, or as you get into this process of self-discovery or self-inquiry, that you don't do it from the perspective of trying to judge yourself, right? Observing and
Mm-hmm.
judging are two different things, right? When you observe something, you detach yourself from it. So you're able to observe what's good and what's bad. Um, I mean, even just calling it bad is a judgment, of course, but the point is not for you
Yeah,
to judge it, right? The
very
point
true.
is for you to just observe it and look at it and see it for what it is, that
Mm-hmm.
rather than just looking at yourself and saying, oh, that's shitty, or that's bad, or I hate that, or I hate this.
Yeah.
That's not the point of this exercise, right? I think when you start learning how
Yep.
to just notice yourself and see why things happen, um, that's the start. I mean, I think it's really important to be clear that I'm not advocating, and I don't think we are advocating, that people who want to do this use this as a medium to judge themselves, because there's a lot of that going on every day already, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Um, I
Or
guess,
even go so far as to assign blame, because
yeah,
that's the other thing, right? Like, to what I was saying earlier, like, if you peel back the layers and then you find out that it's fundamentally rooted in something that you grew up with, that isn't meant to assign blame,
yeah,
right? You're not meant to go, oh, it was because so and so did this to me in primary school, or mom or dad didn't give me this, and that's why I feel this way.
yeah,
It's really to, again, observe it and go, oh, that's where it comes from.
mm,
Huh, okay, that's good to know. And then know that the next time that feeling comes up, or that thought, understanding that that's where it comes from, and so do you lean into that,
Yeah.
um, or do you lean away from it, or do you just kind of go with it and understand like, okay, this is where it's coming from, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the outcome of this next situation that's making me feel this way is going to potentially um, yield the same um, sort of situation as the last time this sort of happened, and that's why I'm feeling that way.
So if you had
Oof.
one line, only one line to tell people or give them an idea as to what they can expect in upcoming episodes, what would you say?
What would I say? Uh,
Just tune in, right? You'll find out. That's it.
yeah, I think I'm gonna try to be as upfront and honest as I possibly can. I'm gonna treat this as though we're having a conversation just between you and me, and I'm gonna try to open up as I would with you,
Yeah.
someone that I deeply trust, and someone that I see so much of myself in, you know. So that's what I think the viewers can expect. Like that was way too wordy.
That's
So
fine.
that,
That's
yeah,
fine.
I don't think you can fit that in a sentence. But
It's okay. We'll
yeah,
call it a
if we
paragraph.
could, yeah, thanks.
No worries, man. I think, yeah, I echo that, man. I think, at the very least, I think what people can expect is for us to be genuine with one another as we go through this process, and really just
Mm,
about as we go through this process of exploring ourselves and being curious. And it's not just, I hope, going to be about us talking about our own stuff, but, really talking about things that interest us, topics, and issues that are related to this whole process of self-inquiry. And I think if we can be genuine and approach this with the right attitude, individually, I think we'll benefit quite a bit, as in we'll help each other. And
mm,
we'll
yeah.
provide support to one another, right? And in so doing, I hope that others who tune in will get some measure of comfort as well, right? And they can join us on this journey as well. And hopefully we get to touch. That's a wrong word. So many ways they can go. But not touch, I guess, not inspire people, right? To just embark on their own journeys, right? And ultimately, I think the point I want to get to is just getting to a better version of yourself that's happier and that's much more contented and less reactive in life, right? And I think if we achieve that for ourselves or get closer to that, that's great. It's a great outcome, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Cool.
Self-awareness is always a good thing for sure.